Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our final webinar series on best practices for brand communications in times of uncertainty. My name is Rebecca Dersh, and I am the head of PR here at Cision. First and foremost, we hope everyone is doing well. We know this is a really difficult time, and we hope you're staying safe. Today, I'm joining you along with my panelists from our home offices based in Austin, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Phoenix. We apologize in advance if one of our human or fur children decide to make their presence known on today's webinar. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items for you. We plan to make this session as interactive as possible. We'll be live tweeting the event using the hashtag COVID-19comms, so please join in on the conversation there. Again, it's COVID-19comms. As we go through the webinar today, if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. We have had an overwhelming response to this webinar, so we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible, and where possible, we may group them by theme. We are going to run today's webinar with some introductory content from our presenters, but leave plenty of time for a live Q&A at the end. A recording of today's presentation will be sent to all attendees and will also be made available on cision.com following this webinar. Today's session is focused on emerging from a crisis with a communications plan, and we'll be talking with our panelists about effective ways to communicate as this crisis peaks and dissipates, timing, and the best ways to move forward after a crisis. So now, before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to ask that all of our attendees today answer this poll. We just want to get a sense of what our audience looks like today and which industries are represented. I'm really looking forward to our final discussion today as we cover the key practices on emerging from a crisis and adjusting to our new normal. So I'll give you a minute to just thank you everyone for submitting. One more second to show the results. Wow, a lot of agency folks. Interesting. A lot of nonprofit as well. Great. This is really interesting to see. I think I know I've heard a lot of feedback from the agency folks on best ways of communicating with clients. So I think there'll be some great lessons, regardless of if you're in-house or not. But with all that, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. I am joined by Brent Diggins from Allison & Partners, Sarah Lutzinger from Boys and Girls Club of America, and Leslie Kimball from Distilled Spirits Council. Brent oversees Allison & Partners' global measurement and analytics capabilities and has helped to develop data and measurement solutions that inspire strategy for a wide variety of clients, including Amazon, Google, Samsung, and Toyota. Sarah oversees external communications activities for one of the largest youth development nonprofit organizations in the country, with 4,700 service locations. She focuses on creating innovative public relations campaigns, developing the organization's reputation management strategies, and building an integrated content marketing approach. Leslie leads the communications and branding teams for both Discuss and Responsibility.org, overseeing a broad portfolio that includes the organization's brand strategy, reputation management, executive communications, strategic messaging, public affairs, publications, marketing strategy, creative content, and digital presence. I think it's safe to say we're all very busy right now. Now we're going to dive into hearing from our speakers. Given that so many of you too are coming from the agency side, I think Brent will have a lot of interesting insights to share for you. So Brent, we're going to kick off with you. What insights do you have to share with us today?
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. Hope everybody is well. Coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. Weather is nice here, thank goodness. So it allows a little bit more outside activity. I think one insight, and before we get into the insights, one thing I want people to really consider or think about is this pandemic has really shown why communicators need a seat at the C-suite level. It's not maybe the time or place on this webinar it is, but let's think about that as we go forward. We're driving a lot of the things that brands are doing going forward. We are the face in a lot of organizations for the employees or the brand itself. So that's one of my, overarching thoughts, not really an insight, but happy to jump into the insights on the next slide. So we're approaching this at Allison & Partners as a phased approach. And I'll lead you through some of the phases, give you an indication of where we may be. I'm looking at data every day around the globe, taking insights from our global organization on the ground as well, to try to build a picture of what's actually happening. And I think we all need clarity in our professional lives, our personal lives, et cetera. But let's stick to the professional, obviously, here. And here's the model that we are following. And we'll start with shock. And in the US, this really was around mid-March, March 13th, that Friday, the 14th, I believe, is really when shock in the US took hold. In Europe, it was, a week or two, depending on where you're at. And this was just the influx of people not knowing what's happening, of governments locking down, making decisions, and businesses just being completely disrupted from what they've ever known. The next phase is the orientation phase. So that, shock phase was a week or two, and most businesses pivoted quickly into orientation. And orientation is really, getting your mental feet under you, understanding what you're facing, and formulating a response. And a lot of this was done internally. It was done with employees, with partners, with customers, but just really getting a grasp of what you're at. It's typically one of the most difficult phases to master, and some organizations, depending on a lot of factors, are still in this phase. It's not an easy phase at all. And I think that you continually have to keep asking yourself questions during the orientation phase if you're in it. The next phase that we look at is the command phase. And I guess that, most organizations are probably in this phase. It's where your company is sort of getting into the day-to-day response and adaptation to our current new normal. We're anticipating that this phase is probably, 6 or 8 more weeks. And it actually is a continuing phase, right? You're always going to be adapting to the situation. When we look at, some global data, conversations that are happening both in social and traditional media, one government announcement can cause a huge influx or change in emotion, in volume, in just the overall tone of what the conversation is. And we have to be very conscious as communicators that we're consistently looking at what the tone is. It could change in a flash. If a government has a press conference, if a government announces shelter-in-place rules, or even coming up, we're seeing a lot of reentry rules, which leads us to the next point as well. We're seeing a lot of states and governments around the country starting to release the frameworks of return to normal. But that doesn't suggest that we are about to enter the recovery phase, which you see on the graph. Again, this is still the command phase where a lot of things are going to change. The reentry are just a common criteria to help companies look at some of the preconditions for entering the workplace. In this phase, and this is right now, literally, I live in Arizona, a more bullish state. I'm potentially looking at reentry. The governor recently said they might want to be the leader in that. We have a few factors that might help with that, including a large amount of space and not a high volume of population. But anyways, as we start to hear these plans, that's an indication that we should really ramp up our scenario-based planning. When are you going to, reenter? If you have a headquarters in the state that reenters, but you have a lot of locations in different places, what's the communications to the employees, to our customers, to the public? We should not assume that, recovery is a new normal. Recovery really happens when, in this pandemic, there are 0 new cases. When that is, that's, for a lot of people to speculate about, or when a vaccine is done. But, that's really the recovery phase, the period of business when the actual emergency is passed. Again, when there's almost 0 new cases and your customers are trying to work, we're still trying to return to the rhythms of daily life. And this is going to, vary based on your organization, stakeholders, and even your industry. Some sectors, B2B, might really accelerate in this recovery phase. Others in, hospitality, in travel and tourism, this could go longer. So, the recovery phase is the next phase that we're looking at, but probably won't get there for 6 to 8 weeks. Hopefully it's sooner. I hope we're wrong, but that's what we're anticipating. And management in this phase will be essential to ensure you're prepared for what comes next. And, again, my first point, why I strongly believe communication should have a seat in the C-suite generally, but particularly during a pandemic, is because this recovery phase is going to become so important. It's going to become so fluid, and it's going to change state to state, country to country, industry to industry. And every one of us should be prepared to navigate that, again, with some scenario-based planning. Finally, a bump. Hopefully this bump for all of us is a great bump. And this is really when business follows the recovery, pent-up demand is released, and there's a surge in business. And hopefully we'll be communicating, we'll be talking to customers, and hopefully it's quick and extended, and our economic woes go away quickly. But that would be that last phase. And then equilibrium. Equilibrium is the new normal. It's a sustainable level of business, probably not returning to the way things are. So I think as communicators, we're just going to have to change probably everything that we've known in this equilibrium, new normal last phase. And all the phases leading up to that will have helped get us there. I think if we could go to the next slide. Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I'm curious to kind of hear, and maybe you're about to dive into this, but how are you communicating that to clients right now, preparing them for what's to come?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. There's no one right answer. It's, you see a lot of different people participating from a lot of different industries on this call, and every organization and industry is unique. We're hearing in some sectors that, is returning to some normalcy where, if it's a B2B, certainly there's some industries that are being successful, including, the webinar conferences like the one we're on now are providers. So it's really different, by industry. I think the best thing you can do is have situational awareness. And that's why, we're looking at data, social listening, text analytics from earned media on a daily basis, helping our clients look at certain issues as well, even looking at competitors, of course, because, it's going to be, the light switch could turn on really fast. If a state says reentry on May 1st, in Germany, for example, our colleagues, the government just announced that they are going back, small businesses opening in 4 days from now. Schools expected to start on May 3rd, for some positive news and how other countries, but their light switch turned on literally in a day. And now companies have to react to that. And we should be preparing, to expect that same sort of situation coming up probably pretty quickly here from, what we're all seeing and hearing. So prepare, look at scenarios more than ever. And I think, going to the next slide here. So here's some actual practical things. Well, the last one was, theoretical. Hopefully I always like to share things that people can get back to their organization or think about and start doing immediately. And there's a lot of different phases here. Obviously with communication, we touch so many different parts of a business, but I put some on paper here that maybe we can walk through, starting with number one in the upper left, and that's internal communications. Obviously keeping our employees, is essential for most businesses. If we do come out of this and come out quickly, none of us want to have a lack of employees, to actually conduct the business. So what we're recommending to a lot of clients, and a lot of clients are implementing, are two things. One, ongoing pulse surveys, just checking on some of the more day-to-day operations of the business. Hey, is your IT working, computer working, how are, in our case, clients working, everything like that. The other part of it, which is very important, is obviously our employee wellness. So we internally at Allison and Partners, we do this twice a week, and we also have a number of clients doing it, reaching out to the workforce on a wellness perspective. So we're gathering information for them so that we, again, this is internal communications, can help them communicate to the executive leadership team of what may need to happen, how the sentiment for employees are, so that when we do return to the next phases, we have a functioning, mentally, physically well workforce. And I want to keep a tap on that. So that's a couple ideas for the internal comms. External comms, I think one thing here is, anything that we put out externally, there's a huge risk for us to appear as tone deaf. As we all know, it's probably the thing that keeps us all up at night. So a lot of clients are implementing, concept testing for tone messaging, and this applies certainly to external communications as well. Who they test against depends on the organization. It could be customers, it could be employees, stakeholders. So something to consider as you actually put together your messaging. Again, it could be fluid. You might have to do this more than once, or likely change it as we go throughout the entire phase. But that's something from external comms. Social media, this is a no-brainer. Social listening, we're doing it for ourselves and clients daily. The emotion and volatility on social media can change in an instant. When we started looking at this, there was, again, in mid-March, we saw the highest spike in earned media, social media, and there was a high amount of volatility, more than normal, of course, on social media, and a lot of emotion, anger, sadness, joy. And those things have, continually subsided to their lowest point, literally week over week. The volume and the volatility of emotion goes down. But one ignition point, again, the government making a decision, news about the healthcare crisis or death tolls can immediately change the entire tone and sentiment of social media. So that's social media listening. If you're, in charge of social media, operating on social media, communicating through social media, before you post anything, make sure that you have the up-to-minute tone, because literally an hour ago could have changed the entire internet. On the customer side, some things to, again, gather how they may want to be communicated to, what external messaging may be as we look to that. A lot of people are doing direct surveys to customers. Again, this is more in the B2B space where the customer base is a little bit more controlled and are looking for solutions. If you're an organization who may not feel comfortable or you don't have the right audience to conduct a direct-to-customer survey, one great option is to really look at your frontline employees, your a call center, your sales team, people who are interacting with customers on a regular basis, and they are often able to give you a good pulse, at least directionally, of what customers may be thinking. So again, you can formulate your messaging, you can be conscious of the tone that you may need to take, and again, you might want to do this more than once, especially as the situation continues to unfold again as we looked at on the disruption life cycle. And then finally, situation analysis. I think this is what people are looking for the most. It's what's the current situation? Tell me what I should do. And there's no right answer. Again, every industry organization is different. So, we recommend looking at the conversation, right? If you couple that with the customer and social listening, and then you start to look at some text analytics or conversation analytics within your industry, you can start to build a picture of what's happening and where you may go. You're still going to have to take a communications risk as you move forward. If you are a thought leader company, it's really going to depend on your culture, right? If you want to lay back and let the industry leader, take the forefront in reentry, then they may do that and, outgain you a little bit. So that's really a theoretical business question for everybody to consider. Industry and competitor insights, that's what I was talking about just a second ago. A lot of people are worried, hey, is my competitor going to jump out there and beat me to the message and beat me to the punch and gain some market share potentially again in that bump life cycle? Are they going to take over some of our customers a little bit more? So people are really taking a look at their competitors, and probably now is the time to do that more than ever. Early on, a few weeks ago, probably not as relevant, but people are ramping up in planning. Scenario-based planning, which we talked about, every scenario should be looked at. I'll give you an example. I'm a nonprofit board for young adults with autism, so take it out of my direct customer base, but at least bringing it to the same premise is that, what happens in their educational institution if the state says that schools can go back to school? Are you going to follow the state's direction, or are you going to follow your own direction? Those kind of questions, scenario-based planning, and there's a million decisions that as communicators, we need to consider how we'll communicate that. And then, for the more advanced people, if you have multiple channels, some automated mixed marketing and cause and effect analysis. That's something that a lot of clients are doing. If we do more media relations, is our brand going up? Or pick any channel, email, social, what's the cause and effect? And I think that's really key in deciphering this, because we don't know what the new normal is going to be. So doing cause and effect analytics is something the more advanced companies are doing as well. That's all I got.
That was great. Thank you so much for giving that full picture. And we'll definitely be picking your brain more at the live Q&A. Thank you. And just for our guest today, just a reminder, if you're not able to see the slides right now, there should be a navy button at the bottom of your screen, and you can navigate there to see and choose what you'd like to look at. And again, we are using hashtag COVID-19comms, and you can use the chat box, the Q&A chat box, to ask your questions, which we will be addressing at the end of this. Thank you again, Brent. Next up, we have Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to hear what practices a nonprofit is implementing right now. I think clearly we have a lot of folks on the line coming from the nonprofit world, so I think it'll be really helpful to hear what you're up to.
Great. Well, thank you for having me today. Right now is such a critical time for so many nonprofits, just like in corporate. We're looking at different solutions, different opportunities. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we approach this moment, and then talk a little bit about what we're looking for in the future. So you can go ahead and go to the first slide. And then the next one. One of the things that we wanted to take an opportunity to do during this time is that Boys and Girls Clubs often responds when there's a crisis or a disaster. We have 4,700 service locations around the country. We serve 4.7 million kids and teens a year. So both here in America, but we also have Boys and Girls Clubs on every military base around the world. So whether it's a hurricane or other sort of natural disaster or other crisis issue, we respond in a lot of different ways. But sometimes those opportunities are regional or isolated in different areas of the country or amongst different interest groups. And as we started planning against this, which was, starting in late February, we definitely got a little bit ahead of the curve, but certainly not as much as we had hoped. We thought this would be a really great opportunity for us to come together with one united message. So Boys and Girls Clubs are all independent 501c3 organizations, and Boys and Girls Clubs of America is really kind of the nucleus of the organization, helping to support clubs around the country. So in similar models, both on the corporate and nonprofit side, you can work with other, with your affiliates on certain things, but not necessarily make them talk about things in a certain way or market them in a certain way. And we felt this is an important opportunity for us to all rally around a central message, because there was so much similarity into what our clubs and our kids were going through in communities around the country. So very early on, we focused on creating simple, digestible messages that our clubs and as well as at the national level can implement. And it was really around how are local communities serving during the coronavirus epidemic, and then how you can help. And that may seem simple, but it's very hard to rally a lot of people, thousands of people around a simple message. And how we tried to do that is cascade all of the work that clubs were doing into three categories. So first, we looked at operationally what was going on and how and what the needs were. And so for background, we have over 3,000 clubs that are still providing services to communities. So first is virtual learning. Second is providing meals to communities in need. And third is helping care for essential workers' children during the day. So that could be healthcare workers, it could be other essential workers. And we have that happening on almost 400 clubs around the country. And so we wanted to use this opportunity as a way to cascade those stories down to everything that we were doing. We had begun creating a content team at Boys and Girls Clubs of America, really focused on storytelling and helping educate others around who we are and what we do. And it was in its infancy, but we were able to redirect some additional team members to really help us focus first on how can we share this message and this rally cry with our key supporters. And so that was, focused on sharing incredible stories from clubs around very, very aspirational and inspirational moments that are happening around the country. And using that to fuel everything that we've been doing. So we've been using it to fuel for other nonprofits on the line, our fundraising activities. So the best way that we can share with our partners and with individual donors why it's important is to really help them see the tangible impact that they can make right now. And that's not always an ask that we can make, pending what is going on in the world. But this is a perfect opportunity to illustrate that this is a need that's happening right now in your community. Here's how you can help. And we also use that with our social supporters and followers beyond just our core group, but into influencers and others that we've been talking with over the years, but never really got them to cross the finish line. So it's a huge opportunity for us to show them in a very, very, again, tangible way that this is an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity for us to really share that story. And we've done so far a mix of traditional influencers. We had a great a segment last night on Jimmy Fallon's show. But we've also been using YouTube influencers and younger people that can help us reach different audiences to share the work that we're doing. And then finally, and with me with a PR background, thinking of PR sort of down the line as it relates to tactics is a little bit different. But it really made sense for us at this moment because we were able to fuel with a huge bank of stories, get it to our influencers and our partners and our donors to really show the impact and create some momentum. And then also continue that momentum through sharing with our media friendlies and other partners to help spread the word. So part of how we did that was through traditional media relations. Our team also worked to create 3 new digitally focused PSAs to help share this story, working with our partners. And so we were able to kind of think about these communications in a surround sound type of way. So how can we, no matter what we're doing, that everyone who is thinking or looking about things around Boys and Girls Clubs is seeing this tangible impact and this simple message that then, of course, is hopefully drawing everyone to our donation pages and really helping impact this work. But along the way, we're hoping certainly to catch them and help them be part of our network and advocate for us in the future. Another thing I just wanted to also touch on is that we also have had an incredible, to what Brent was saying earlier, an incredible need for communications. And it's been proven during this time, both on an external side, but also an internal side with our entire network, of keeping them up to date on what is happening, sharing an unbelievable amount of assets with them. And one of them I'll just point out is, we started seeing and looking at other sort of more for-profit organizations doing fun things with their logos and their brand. And so we quickly put together, our iconic logo, which is hands clasped, and had put the bubbles around it. So it's a washing hands. It's probably one of our most engaged pieces. And we saw a huge uptick going into our website after that change.
That's awesome. I love that.
I'm going to click to the next slide.
That's great.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. And so, this webinar is a little bit about, what are we doing to move forward? How are we thinking about this? And, for us, we're also really focused on certainly fundraising, which I touched a little bit more on, sharing our story and the impact that clubs are having. And on an operational side, there's going to be a huge uplift as we start to see the recovery process, and we start to slowly open some of the clubs back up and really get back to full capacity. But on an external communication side, on the national level, on our own channels and in our other media relations and partner relations that we're doing, we're really looking at how can we plan forward in a way that is appropriate from a tone perspective. That's definitely something we're also really looking at, hyper-focused on. How do we have the appropriate message at the right time? But also marrying it with what we're seeing both in our data for what people are looking at on our site and the engagement that we're having on social, and then also what we're seeing in the marketplace. We do kind of a quick test and learn analysis every Wednesday. And one of the things that we're learning is that people are looking for inspiration. They're looking for positivity. And so, we're starting to plan towards that and thinking about how we can tell these new stories, even as we start to open back up. How are we supporting young people through graduation? How are we looking at big macro issues like mental health and the impact it has on young people, both to give us some additional intellectual opportunity to share the best practices from a youth development perspective, but also to show that we have our hand on the pulse of what's happening with young people and the impact that this is having. A lot of times we focused on our donors and parents being kind of a second, but we're really focused now too on how are we bringing that sort of parent audience into our donor base even more, because of the opportunity with just, I, as a parent myself, I'm home looking for resources, looking for advice, looking for counsel. And it's a huge opportunity for us to bring a whole different audience into the fold so that we can plan forward into the future in who we are and the type of organization that we want to be. We're very, as a Boys and Girls Clubs is brick and mortar based. We have young people go into our 4,700 clubs every day. So we had launched a virtual clubhouse for our members, and we're looking at what does that look like if we expand it. And I think to what Brent was saying earlier, there's so much unknown. So for us, we're trying to think through what we do know and how we can plan against that now, but also planning to be agile and planning to be able to respond to what we're seeing in the marketplace, to how our operations are being impacted, but also in thinking about how we want to respond and be who we want to be, and show that sort of hope, that inspiration that people look to Boys and Girls Clubs for. and also respond in a way that's going to make sense for our brand, and that's going to show the impact that we're having both now, but the impact and the importance of clubs moving forward. Workforce development has been one of the biggest things that we've been talking about as an organization. In the traditional sense, but also in the sense of learning basic essential skills when you're 6, 7, 8 years old around impulse control and learning to work together as a team, and how critical those are, in particular for youth that need us most, and how we can help them build those skills that turn into job readiness and career skills, and then how that impacts young people as they're looking to either go to college or start a career or job right after high school in an economy that looks a little different, and how even more critical having those foundational skills will be, but also having the positive mentors and supports to help get them there. So we're looking at how we can kind of blend those stories, because if I had a crystal ball, I would guess that any storytelling, PR, and content marketing work that we're doing is going to be somehow connected to COVID, at least for the rest of the year, likely into 2021, because we're going to have to think through, yes, pivoting to the recovery, but also acknowledging the impact that this has had and how critical for Boys and Girls Clubs our services are to ensure that kids around the world and kids right here in the U.S. still have the opportunity to achieve their dreams. So
that was great.
Thank you
so much. That was wonderful. It's really great to see all the work you guys are doing despite the circumstances. I do really quickly want to mention we have record number of attendees. So if you are having some audio problems, we recommend refreshing your page. But also please note that we will be providing a recording of this afterwards. Thank you again, Sarah. Leslie, we're going to move on to you. It's great to have you with us as well. What do you have to share with us today?
Ooh, thank you. I guess it helps to unmute. Just was going to talk a little bit about what our nation's distillers have been doing during the pandemic. Many of them have turned their production into hand sanitizer to help their first responders, health professionals, and local communities. So we're very proud of that work. It's obviously very timely. And there was a clear need since people just were having a really hard time getting sanitizer. So the distillers stepped up. So we recognized, and perfect, there's the next slide. So we recognized very early on, Brent mentioned that fateful Friday when everything sort of changed. He called it, I forget what he called it, but it was a great term. But that was the day we realized that we needed to step in and sort of help. And the need we needed to fill or the problem we needed to solve rather, was that the distillers needed some supplies. They needed ethanol. They needed some glycerin to make the hand sanitizers per the WHO formula. So we set up this portal here that you can see this map. And we did it with our agency in about 48 hours. So to the agency folks out there, now is the time to sort of make these make or break relationships with your clients. So, I mean, I am forever indebted to Beekeeper Group here in DC because they really, really helped us out. And they did not need to work over the weekend, but they didn't. So we're really pleased with that. And Cision also has been awesome. So I know I'm not here to plug Cision, but they've been great too with our health reporters. Anyway, so we turned this around. All of the distillers in their local markets were able to sort of help. Many of them were on the news. Many of them were helping their local police officers, their local hospitals. And then, of course, the president has mentioned this in his daily briefing about 3 times with his administration. He tweeted about it once, which we were really surprised about, but thrilled about that level of attention. And then we've gotten our CEO and a number of our spokespeople out. And again, it's just sort of, they stepped in, they saw a need, it organically happened. We weren't looking for the attention, but it's been really nice to have. And so our next move is we just announced a hand sanitizer safety campaign because we need to keep it out of the hands of kids. So, there's hand sanitizer. I have 2 children. It's laying around. So I've been making sure to sort of get it out of the way so that my kids don't touch it. So we're trying to do our part there to be responsible. And the other thing I would say, just in terms of moving forward, our distillers, of course, produce products, and they want to get back to making whiskey and vodka and all the delicious things that we all love to enjoy. So global retail has been hit. Obviously, people aren't traveling. They're not buying duty-free. Restaurants and bars are closed. So our go-forward plan is to get that operational as soon as it's safe to do so. And we're really looking forward to that time. So I know you want to go to Q&A, so I'm trying to wrap it up quickly, but I'm glad to take questions.
Thank you. No, that's great. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. So yes, we are going to open up to the live Q&A. Obviously, we're all coming from very different areas, but I think there are so many lessons to be learned regardless. One of the questions we're getting is just about messaging. So how do you shift your messaging? You know, this has been over a month now. There was a certain type of messaging when this first kicked off versus now, and how does that shift and what's appropriate and what's not?
I'm glad to take, you want me to take it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So we, of course, used to plan our content weekly, monthly. We turned that off completely. So now it's all hands on deck trying to fill the content. Obviously, we have to make it very relevant and appropriate, as both of my panelists have said. But again, it's just getting out these messages. I don't think that I think we need to over communicate, especially to our members and our stakeholders. There is so much noise out there that it has to be very succinct and messages that people want to use and can learn from. Any of the fluff, it's just not appropriate at this time. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but that's where we are. I also, the other thing I would add is that I think it's a time to work together. So I know that a number of folks have competitors. I don't think now is the time to become competitive. I think it's a time for people to unite and try and help everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Sarah. Just go ahead.
No,
I was just going to add to that. I think, I've been asked, once every day where the messaging framework is. And we do have a messaging framework document, but it's constantly evolving. And I think that's the key, is just, having a core base of your, for us at least, our belief system and the key proof points that we think are going to really activate our supporters to transition to advocates and donors. But I think it's continuing to respond to what we're seeing in the marketplace and evolving it. I'm seeing a lot more humor and light content, because that's what people are looking for. They're looking to escape in some ways, but also looking for hope. So I think it's just something that is to continually evolve, but based in the core kind of foundational pieces that are going to resonate with your audience, and then hopefully get them to take the desired action that you have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah there. One of the risks, I think the biggest risk is, another question to ask is, are you going to put all your messaging in the COVID-19 bucket and, scrap maybe years or decades of the messaging and brand you've built up? I think that's the risk that, people just way of, how much are they going to dip into this without going further than their core brand message and sentiment. I think Sarah mentioned.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. I'm curious, and maybe Brent, you can speak to this more. What are the types of metrics that you're reporting right now, especially given, you might be earning less coverage than usual? How are you communicating that to clients, and what are you sharing?
Yeah, I think this time is less about performance metrics than it is reputation metrics. Are we protecting the brand? Communications role is more. And then it does so many different things, but at this time in this crisis, it's about brand reputation. So, ensuring that we're keeping a pulse on the brand reputation, again, by doing some of those surveys versus the performance metrics, which I think all business leaders understand just aren't there. And that's not just communications, that's sales, everything across the board. So I think protecting the brand and looking at those metrics and, maintaining a pulse of what people are saying, like Leslie was talking about the brand, doing a weekly pulse check, like her best practices, it's super important. I think that's the best you can do metrics wise. For now, for most industries, there's some still lead gen metrics, looking at for again, B2B or essential services, but brand is where we should focus.
Absolutely. I'm curious, Sarah, to hear, and you touched on this a little bit of, you have all these great initiatives you want to share, but you obviously don't want to come off as opportunistic. So how are you balancing that in terms of being able to educate and share all the great work you're doing without seeming both tone deaf and opportunistic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can't argue with a good story with a central hero. And I think that's one of the ways that we've tried to focus. We're a charity too, so it's easy for us to ask for money because that's one of the reasons, that's how we keep the lights on. But I think, coupling that within a compelling story that is real, that is easy to understand, and that has a everyday hero that will be impacted by your support is critical. Because for us, we're kind of on the opposite end. We're seeing over the last month, we have about 200% more media coverage than we did this time last year. So we know that eyeballs are on us. We know that people are looking for, ways to help or other information. So we've really tried to focus on hero. And also, from a tone perspective, share inspiring things, not always with an ask, but our giving side, make sure that we're creating a journey for people that are supporting us where they feel the support, they understand what we're doing, and then they know that we need advocates and we need that support. I think on the flip side with not being a charity, I think it's looking at appropriate ways to be relevant, whether it's showing your support for a partner. I know that's what a lot of our corporate partners have been focused on, is how can they in some cases reallocate their dollars to support some of this work, or come on and help us and illustrate their support for their communities through a charity, is a way that a great way that we've seen from our end, but also a way for corporate brands to be relevant during this time without seeming opportunistic to, illustrate their brand.
Absolutely. Leslie, I'm curious to hear, obviously you're in a different space, how you're managing that as well.
Sorry, my dog is really wanting to participate.
They're the most popular dog.
Exactly. So I feel like we're in a little bit of a different place because we do have a good narrative to tell right now. But we are pivoting a little bit. I can't wait to get Britt's slide just so that I can use it as our terminology. But we are looking to pivot. Some of the laws have changed in the states, changing to whether or not you can get a cocktail with some of the food that you take if you order out and go pick up. So we're sort of looking at that horizon. So there are some opportunities, but there's also some risks. We take responsibility very seriously. So we're making sure that those regulatory hurdles are also responsible and don't come back to hurt us or the public later. So we're taking that very seriously.
Great. I'm curious, and maybe Brent, you can speak to this as well in terms of how you're communicating to clients. We've heard some feedback that clients just want to go back to business as usual and continue moving forward with the plans that they initially had. People are asking, when can we go about business as usual? Is that ever going to happen? And what do you say to clients who, would like to move forward with the plans that you initially had in place?
Yeah, our role as an agency and consultant is to give them the best advice. And there are, certain organizations who want to move ahead maybe quicker than they should. We rely on the data. We try to pull together the best insights for them. Here's what's happening in your industry. Here's what your consumers, your customers may be saying, and approach it from a really data-driven approach. I mean, that's the best that we can do in a time of so much uncertainty or so much unclarity. Anything else is just guesswork, and people will guess, and some will guess right and some will guess wrong. The best thing that we consult is let's make decisions based on the data that we have, not rely on guesswork, which is marketing, communications, even business, tactic is just to go by our gut. And on this time, let's not go by our gut. Let's look at the landscape. Let's understand our situational awareness and where we sit within the entire ecosystem at all times. Like I mentioned earlier, it could change by the minute. So we're being really pragmatic, with all the approaches during this sensitive, unprecedented time. Sure.
Absolutely. I'm curious to hear how you're working with other teams. Obviously, PR is a big part of it, but making sure your social teams are sharing the right messaging and being appropriate. Mail marketing, how are you making sure that everyone's aligned? Because I'm sure there are people internally who do also want to go about business as usual. And how do you just make sure everyone's aligned and your messaging is consistent? Maybe Leslie,
Sarah.
Shift. Or Sarah, yeah. Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think for us, I definitely feel this way, but we have a lot of video call fatigue. But I think that's one of the most important things. We have multiple times a week have a core group representing all of our communication functions, from social to internal, to the executive level. And those working meetings are incredibly helpful to ensure that we're all aligned and that we all have the resources that we need. We're finding too that we've, with everyone working on one thing and focused on one thing, there's been so much synergy around collaboration that that it's been really exciting to see. But also around, simplifying as well of, how we're tracking our metrics to how we're centralizing our messaging. There's been a lot of reliance on other teams, but also a lot of focus because not everyone's not working on a lot of different initiatives. We're all focused on one moment and how we can make an impact during this moment.
Great, thank you. And Leslie, I am curious to hear, since you guys have obviously had to shift a bit, how you're working with teams as well.
We have had to shift. I mean, we were planning to do some press trips overseas. They're obviously not happening. But I mean, I feel like we have more meetings. We're probably, again, over communicating internally. But it has united our team. We all sort of have a mission to support these distillers in a way we always are proud to do. But I think this is it's stepped up a notch. So I think that it sort of reiterates the work that we're doing and the pride we have when we're doing it. And anyone who's sort of not on board, I don't know, there's not really a place. So we're all moving forward. We're all swimming as a big school of fish. And it feels nice. It's good.
Absolutely. It does force us all to communicate more, working from home and also all being on the same campaign.
Right.
For sure.
And it also gives everybody, no matter what work you're doing, a clarity of purpose right now, so it's good.
Absolutely. I'm curious, what are some steps that people can take right now to make sure, they're prepping for the future? Obviously, we don't 100% know when this is going to end, and obviously it's going to affect us when it does, and it's going to affect us for years to come, likely. What can we do right now? What are steps we absolutely should be taking now to ensure that we are prepared for when this does come to an end? And maybe, Brent, you can speak to how you're again, communicating that decline.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, again, when we look back at the earlier model in this command phase, this is the prime time for scenario-based planning. And again, everyone has a different role and responsibility, but there are a lot of scenarios that we know we might need to potentially prepare for. The economic situation could very well get a lot worse. How are we going to prepare to communicate that as an organization? How are we going to prepare to re-enter our industry? Are we going to be a leader? And I know Sarah mentioned that there's this loose messaging, which I think is common and consistently is being revised. But I think, strong scenario-based planning, like you would approach crisis communication for the next steps, which is the reentry, which is the economy, which may or may not rebound, which is your own industry and how you fit within that. For nonprofits, maybe it's donors. I'm not as expert as Sarah, of course, but whatever your key issues are, or maybe scenario planning is that's what everyone should be doing right now, as we are on the cusp of potentially looking at reentrance in the U.S.
Great. We are getting a question. Obviously, events have been put on hold or made virtual. Someone here is talking about an award show that they've had to make virtual. Again, how do you deem what's tone deaf and what's not? Is it a time that we should be celebrating accomplishments, or does it feel tone deaf right now?
I can say one thing just from a data perspective is that we've seen a lot of increase in anger on social about a fatigue from COVID-19 news, where people really are looking for an outlet. And this is not necessarily a brand data point I'm presenting, but just that there is this welling sentiment of COVID-19 fatigue. People need and want to look at other options. We've seen, a lot of influencers and people who operate in, if they're a Twitch streamer, they're not going to, talk about COVID-19, nor should they, right? Or people are looking for them. So people are looking for outlets, at least from a data perspective, that we're working on. We ran some text analytics on that.
I'd agree. I mean, my daughter keeps poking her head in, but she is psyched about Lady Gaga's event on Saturday. I guess it's Saturday night, not tomorrow night, Saturday night. And, I think we as a family have started watching John Krasinski. I think I'm not butchering his name, his Good News report. I mean, those things, I think it's good to watch those things. It shows that we're all hopeful and sort of looking forward to something. So, I think an award show, if done appropriately, acknowledging the situation we're in, would be really nice for somebody to look forward to.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think this is an opportunity, too, to reimagine events. I know sometimes we have events that, are things we do all the time and are really interesting for an internal audience, but might not be as interested, or, a supporter audience, but might not be interested to, a broader audience that would be streamed on the web. But there's also an opportunity with so many people at home, in particular around influencers and celebrities. It's a little bit harder to say you're too busy. And so, I think thinking through, and this is one thing that we're doing, we have a series of galas that happen every spring, and we're looking at how can we rethink these events and find a way to provide some levity and some escape for people, but also, give it an opportunity to reimagine something that we've maybe always done a certain way, that this is maybe now a time that we can introduce an influencer, introduce an element that would help achieve the goals, but also make it more entertaining for people at home.
Definitely. I agree. I think we have time for one more question. Brent, you touched on, this idea of fatigue, and, we are in that spot right now where we are getting a lot of feedback about that. So again, how can we ensure that we are being appropriate, but, being able to move forward? How do you kind of navigate that overall fatigue and ensuring, if typically your messaging wasn't just about COVID before, making sure you're still on brand?
Yeah, that's going to be a real interesting thing going forward, when that recovery phase happens. If every single person comes out with the same sentiment, it may come off as inauthentic, or may come off as just blasé a little bit, because a lot of brands are probably thinking the same way, and it's going to be unique. I like to look at a couple of different things. McDonald's, not a client of ours, but they went cold on social media. If you check out their Instagram, I don't think their Twitter's been updated since mid-March. But in the last 2 days, they posted a couple Instagram posts that are interesting if you just look at this context. And one was really about were here for you, and one was retweeting or just posting something, hey, I want my Big Mac or fries or whatever. So you're starting to see little pockets of normalcy return in some of these communications, and I think you're going to have to balance COVID-19 plus your brand, like I mentioned earlier.
Definitely. I think that's helpful. Any other comments about that before we close out? Any final comments? Leslie, Sarah? Great. Well, looks like our time is up, but really appreciate, obviously, everyone's very busy. Oh, go ahead. Okay. Never mind. Well, thank you, everyone. It does look like the time is up. I really do want to thank our speakers again for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us. Obviously, we have a lot going on, and you guys are very busy. And thank you for everyone who joined us today and those who joined in on our other best practices webinars over the past 5 weeks. We'll be following up with a recording of this webinar tomorrow. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.